My name is Alina Vance, and I am 24 years old, living a quiet life in Norwich, Connecticut. My world, before everything shattered, was a comfortable blend of routine and small dreams. I worked at a local bookstore, surrounded by stories, which was a fitting irony considering the tale my own life was about to become. I loved the smell of old paper and new print, the hushed whispers of readers browsing, and the feeling of connecting people with the perfect book. It was a simple existence, one where my biggest concern was usually recommending the right historical fiction or ordering enough copies of the latest bestseller. I lived in a cozy apartment not far from the Thames River, spending my evenings curled up with a novel or sketching in my journal, drawing inspiration from the historic architecture and the quiet charm of Norwich. I always believed in honesty, in the straightforward path, in treating others with the same respect I hoped to receive. I wasn't a person who sought out drama. I preferred peace and predictability. This belief, this quiet trust in the good intentions of others, would soon be tested in the most painful way imaginable, proving to me that some people live by a completely different code. I had a few close friends, people I'd known since childhood, who shared my values and understood my gentle nature. We'd meet for coffee at the local cafe or walk along the waterfront, talking about our hopes and our futures. I was, in essence, a creature of habit and contentment, looking forward to a future that felt stable and true, perhaps one day building a family of my own, a future where sincerity was paramount. My life was shaken, not by a sudden tremor, but by a slow, insidious erosion of trust that I didn't even realize was happening until it was too late. It began subtly, with the return of an old flame, Mark. Mark was my ex-boyfriend, a charming, charismatic man who had always been a little bit wild, a little bit unpredictable, but who had a way of making me feel special, like I was the only person who truly understood him. We had broken up nearly a year before, mostly due to his enlistment in the army and the distance it created, but also because he had a tendency to be vague about his commitments, a trait I'd learned to accept as just part of his personality, not a warning sign. He was 25, strong and confident in his military uniform, and his impending deployment loomed over him, adding a sense of urgency to our renewed contact. For months, as his deployment drew nearer, we started talking again, first tentatively, then with an increasing familiarity that felt like slipping back into an old, comfortable pair of shoes. He was doing more training, he told me, which meant long hours and sporadic communication. But the calls, the emails, the late-night online chats became a regular fixture in my life. It was more than just talking. It was flirtatious, intimate, deeply personal. He would call me from some far-off base, his voice a low rumble over the static, telling me about his day, asking about mine, laughing at my jokes, making me feel cherished. We spoke about our past, about the reasons we broke up, and about a potential future, a future where we would try again, where he would be back home, and we would build something lasting. He spoke of missing me, of regretting our separation, of how much I meant to him. He even spoke, in hushed tones, about us getting back together properly once his deployment was over, about making plans for when he returned. His words were a balm to my heart, a promise of rekindled love, and I believed him. Every text message, every shared memory, every whispered word over the phone was a thread weaving us back together, or so I thought. I found myself daydreaming more, planning small details of our reunion, feeling a sense of quiet joy blossoming in my chest. He became my main focus, my primary thought throughout the day. I would wait eagerly for his messages, my phone clutched in my hand, and fall asleep with a smile on my face after one of our long conversations. The problem was, I was building a future on a foundation of lies, and I was completely unaware of the unstable ground beneath my feet. My contentment was based on a delusion, and the man I thought I was reconnecting with was a phantom, a carefully constructed illusion. My nemesis, I would soon discover, was not just Mark, but the deceit he had woven around himself, a deceit that entrapped others and the complicity of those who enabled it. My world, once so predictable, was about to be turned upside down, revealing a darkness I hadn't known existed. The threat wasn't just to my heart, but to my belief in human decency, and that was a far more terrifying prospect. The day of Mark's deployment finally arrived, a day I had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. I knew it marked a separation, but also, in my mind, the start of a new chapter for us, a trial by distance that we would overcome. I wanted to do something small, a gesture of support and affection, not just for him, but for his family. I had always been on semi-good terms with his mother, Martha, a stern but seemingly well-meaning woman who had often told me how much she liked me when Mark and I were dating. I decided to leave a small care package and a note on the porch of the house he shared with his mother, a little something to show I was thinking of them, and of him, as he embarked on his service. It was a thoughtful act, one rooted in genuine care. As I pulled up to their familiar driveway, I noticed a car I didn't recognize, a sleek, dark sedan parked near the garage. It was new, definitely not Mark's beat-up old truck, and I hadn't seen it before. I paused for a moment, a fleeting thought crossing my mind, but then dismissed it. They often had renters in their small guest house, or maybe a relative was visiting. It didn't seem significant, not then. I quietly placed the gift and the note on their porch, making sure it was tucked away from the elements, and then drove off, a feeling of bittersweet anticipation in my heart. The goodbyes had been said, the promises whispered, and now all that was left was to wait for him to return, and for our life to truly begin. I spent the next couple of days trying to settle back into my routine, the silence where his calls used to be feeling heavy, but I reminded myself it was temporary. Then the letter arrived. It wasn't a casual note, or a thank you, or even a simple acknowledgement of my gesture. It was a thick envelope, handwritten with Martha's familiar looping script, but the energy emanating from it was cold and sharp. I tore it open, my fingers trembling slightly with a mix of curiosity and a vague unease. The words inside were a gut punch, each sentence a blow that reverberated through my entire being, stealing the air from my lungs. "Eleanor Vance," it began, not with a polite greeting, but with an accusatory tone, "I cannot believe the audacity you possess." My eyes scanned faster, trying to make sense of the sudden hostility. "You have no right to interfere with my son's life, especially now that he is a married man. You are nothing but trouble trying to cause problems for him and his new wife." The words blurred, then sharpened again as my brain struggled to process what I was reading. A married man, his new wife. This was how I found out. Not from him, not from a mutual friend, but through a nasty, venomous letter from his own mother, who accused me of trying to disrupt a marriage I didn't even know existed. The letter continued, digging deeper, twisting the knife. "And as for your little gift, it is an insult. What kind of whore sleeps with a man before marriage? You should be ashamed of yourself." My vision swam. Whore. The word hung in the air, thick and repulsive. My own ears felt hot with shame and fury, even though I knew I had done nothing wrong, nothing to deserve such a hateful slur. The irony of her accusation was a bitter, burning coal in my stomach. I remembered something Mark had told me years ago, a throwaway comment about his parents' history. His mother, Martha, had a shotgun wedding herself, barely 18, already pregnant with Mark when she walked down the aisle. Her moral outrage felt like a cruel joke, a veil for her own hypocrisy. I had no idea, absolutely no idea he was even seeing someone, let alone engaged or married. Not a single word had he mentioned during all those months of intimate conversations, during all those late-night calls filled with whispered promises. He had been planning a future with me while simultaneously building a life with another woman. The betrayal was a physical ache, a searing pain that started in my chest and spread through every part of my body. My world didn't just shake, it imploded. All those dreams, all that hope, all the trust I had so freely given, crumbled into dust. The man I loved, the man I believed was honorable, was a liar, a deceiver of the cruelest kind. And his mother, instead of being horrified by his actions, was defending his lie, attacking me for simply existing in the periphery of his deception. I was not just heartbroken. I was humiliated, blindsided, and utterly enraged. The problem I faced was not just my shattered heart, but the injustice of being made a scapegoat, of being painted as the villain in a story where I was the innocent, unwitting victim. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a profound betrayal of trust, and it demanded more than just tears. It demanded a truth, a reckoning. My comfortable, predictable life in Norwich had just been invaded by a brutal, ugly reality, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I couldn't simply let it go. The quiet, kind Alina Vance was gone, replaced by a woman who felt the cold, hard edge of a righteous fury. The satisfaction I once found in stories and books was now replaced by an urgent, burning need to write my own narrative of justice, to expose the tangled web of lies Mark had spun, and to ensure that those who enabled him would finally see the chaos they had helped to create. My quiet life had been shattered, and now it was time for me to shatter theirs. The immediate aftermath of that letter was a blur of raw, unadulterated pain. I didn't just feel heartbroken. I felt as if a vital organ had been ripped from my chest, leaving a gaping, bleeding wound. The shock was paralyzing, a cold wave that washed over me, leaving me shivering despite the warmth of my apartment. I reread the letter countless times, as if hoping the words would change, that the accusations would somehow transform into a misunderstanding. But they never did. Each rereading brought a fresh wave of nausea, a renewed sense of betrayal that was so profound it bordered on the surreal. How could someone I had known, someone I had loved, someone I had reconnected with on such an intimate level, deceive me so completely, so maliciously? How could he build a future with another woman while simultaneously rebuilding a connection with me, making me believe we had a chance at reconciliation? The questions swirled in my mind like a violent storm, offering no answers, only deeper confusion and a crushing sense of foolishness. I spent days in a haze, barely eating, barely sleeping. The vibrant world of Norwich seemed dull, muted by my grief. My beloved bookstore, usually a sanctuary, felt suffocating. I called out sick, telling my manager I had a bad flu because the thought of facing colleagues, of putting on a brave face, felt utterly impossible. I mostly lay on my couch, staring blankly at the ceiling, the image of Mark's face superimposed on the plaster, his voice echoing in my ears with every false promise, every loving word that now felt like a cruel joke. My closest friend, Sarah, grew worried when I didn't answer her calls for a day. She showed up at my door, her face etched with concern, a bag of groceries and a new book in her hand. Seeing her familiar, kind face, the dam finally broke. I dissolved into racking sobs, the story pouring out of me in gasps and sniffles, punctuated by the crumpled letter clutched in my hand. Sarah listened patiently, her arm wrapped around me, her own face slowly turning from concern to shock, and then to a quiet, simmering anger on my behalf. She validated my feelings, telling me I wasn't crazy, that this was an unimaginable betrayal. She brought me tea, sat with me in silence when I needed it, and offered small, comforting words. Her presence was a lifeline in the churning ocean of my despair. But even her unwavering support couldn't completely lift the cloud. The humiliation gnawed at me. The fact that his mother had called me a whore for something he initiated, something he orchestrated, made my blood boil in a different way. It wasn't just about my broken heart anymore. It was about my dignity, my reputation, my very character being slandered by someone who should have been horrified by her son's actions, not mine. The grief slowly began to morph into something else, something sharper, colder, anger. It wasn't a raging, uncontrollable fury at first, but a quiet, steady burn like embers beneath ashes. I felt wronged, not just emotionally, but morally. Mark had not just cheated. He had lied, manipulated, and strung me along for months, knowing full well he was building a life with another woman. He had used my trust, my affection, my hopes for a future as playthings. And his mother, Martha, instead of holding him accountable, had chosen to attack the victim, to shame me. The injustice of it all became intolerable. I tried to push it away, to rationalize it, to tell myself to simply move on. "It's not worth it, Alina," I whispered to myself, looking in the mirror at my tear-stained face. "Just let it go. You deserve better than to dwell on someone so cruel." I even drafted an email to Mark, a long, rambling message filled with my hurt and confusion, begging for an explanation. I spent hours crafting it, trying to convey the depth of my pain, hoping for some shred of remorse, some acknowledgement of his deception. But then I hesitated. What good would it do? He was already deployed, thousands of miles away, shielded by distance. He could easily ignore it, deflect, or worse, gaslight me further. The thought of him dismissing my pain, making me feel even smaller, was unbearable. I deleted the draft, the words disappearing into the digital void, leaving behind a cold, hard knot of unresolved anger. One afternoon, a few weeks after the letter arrived, I was sketching in my journal, trying to lose myself in art, but my mind kept drifting back to Mark, to the deception. I found myself doodling vengeful scenes, exaggerated caricatures of Martha with a long nose, Mark with multiple faces. It was a dark, childish outlet for my frustration. Then a thought, clear and sharp, cut through the haze of my anger. If they didn't know what he'd been doing, they should. Not just Mark's wife, but his mother, too. She had accused me of causing problems, but she was standing by, enabling his web of deceit. She deserved to live with the consequences of her son's actions, especially if she was going to actively participate in covering them up and attacking me. My hands stilled. This wasn't about being vindictive. This was about truth, about justice. I deserved the truth to be known. His new wife deserved to know the truth about the man she had just married. And his mother deserved to face the consequences of enabling a liar and hurting an innocent person. I stood up, a new purpose filling me, a cold resolve settling deep in my bones. The lethargy that had held me captive for weeks began to lift, replaced by a quiet, determined energy. My first step was to gather the evidence. Over the past months, Mark and I had exchanged hundreds, if not thousands, of messages. Texts, emails, online chats on various platforms. and phone calls, hours and hours of them. I had never deleted anything, a habit born of sentimentality, and now it was a weapon. I spent the next few days methodically, painstakingly going through every single conversation. It was a grueling process, a painful reliving of every false intimacy, every sweet lie. Each message I opened, each email I reread was a fresh stab to my heart, a painful reminder of how utterly I had been deceived. "Can't wait until you're back, Ale, so we can finally just be together," one text read. Another, an email, detailed a fantasy future he had described for us, involving a small house and a dog. I saw my own eager, hopeful replies, innocent and trusting, now rendered pathetic by the truth. As I printed them out, page after page, my small printer whirring endlessly, the stacks of paper grew higher on my desk. Each sheet was a tangible piece of his deception, an irrefutable record of his betrayal. I printed out the phone records, too, highlighting the dates and times of his calls to me, proving the frequency and duration of our communication, especially during the period he was supposedly engaged or even married. It was sickening to see the sheer volume of his lies laid bare, evidence of his calculated duplicity. The sheer weight of the paper, the undeniable proof, solidified my resolve. This wasn't a petty act of revenge. It was an unveiling, an exposure of profound dishonesty. Once all the evidence was gathered, neatly organized into separate piles of texts, emails, and call logs, I decided to drive by his house again. The memory of the unfamiliar car from deployment day still lingered in my mind. I needed to confirm my suspicions, to see if the new wife was truly living there, as Martha's letter had implied. I drove slowly down his street, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. And there it was. The same sleek, dark sedan, still in the driveway. This time, however, my eyes immediately spotted something else. Scrawled across the back window in white, bubbly script were the words, "Just married, congrats wife's name and mark." The names were too faded and smudged to fully decipher, but the message was blindingly clear. They hadn't just gotten married. It was recent enough for the celebratory writing to still be on the car. And the car being there day after day confirmed it. His new wife was living at his mom's place. My breath hitched. It was a cruel confirmation, a final, undeniable piece of the puzzle. A strange, cold satisfaction bloomed in my chest amidst the lingering pain. Perfect. Now his mother would have to live in the chaos she helped create. She wouldn't be able to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening, or to blame it all on me. It would be right there under her own roof, a daily reminder of her son's deceit and her own misplaced loyalty. This solidified my plan, giving it a sharper edge, a more precise target. I didn't have his new wife's full name, only the partial name on the car window, but I knew I could address the letter to Mark's wife, or the new Mrs. Mark's last name. It was enough. My plan began to take shape, meticulous and unyielding. I would mail them letters to his mom's house, exposing him as a cheater, ensuring both the wife and the mother would receive their personalized doses of truth. I returned to my apartment, my mind buzzing with the details, the pieces of my revenge clicking into place. The first letter would be for his new wife. I carefully selected the most damning pieces of evidence. The texts where he told me he loved me, the emails planning our future, the phone records showing calls made late at night, calls he had made when he was supposedly with her. I wanted her to see it all, every single lie, every broken promise. I wrote the letter itself with a steady hand, my tone calm and factual, devoid of emotion, though my heart was still a knot of anger and hurt. I laid it all out for her, everything he had been doing behind her back, the months of emotional intimacy he had cultivated with me while engaged to or married to her. I explained how I had found out, through his mother's cruel letter, emphasizing that I was as much a victim of his deception as she was. I included all the receipts, every single printed page, bound neatly with a paper clip. I wanted there to be no doubt, no room for him to deny it. The second letter was to his lovely mother, Martha. This one had a different tone, sharper, more direct. I acknowledged her previous letter but twisted her own words back on her. I told her that during all the time I was talking to her son, not once did he mention a wife or an engagement. I emphasized that he was actively pursuing me, telling me he wanted to get back together, making plans for our future. I reminded her of her own shotgun wedding, since she seemed to have a selective memory when it came to moral judgments. I didn't use harsh language, but the implication was clear. Her own past made her accusations of me being a whore utterly hypocritical and baseless. I ended the letter by letting her know that his wife now had a full account of what her son had been up to, a full dossier of his deceit. I wanted her to understand the immediate, undeniable consequence of her son's actions and her own complicity. I wanted her to feel the discomfort of the chaos under her own roof, a chaos she had tried to blame me for. I bundled both letters, each addressed clearly, one to Mark's wife, C.O. Martha Vance, and the other to Martha Vance, both destined for the same address. The next morning, I drove to the post office. I went to the counter, my face impassive, and with a quiet voice, requested that both letters be sent with a required signature. I wanted to be absolutely sure that they would be delivered directly, that they would have to acknowledge receipt, and that they would open them right away. It wasn't about speed, it was about certainty. I watched as the postal worker affixed the green slips to the envelopes, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and exhilaration. There was no turning back now. This was it. My final act of exposing the truth, a quiet detonation of the lies Mark had built. As I walked out of the post office, the cool autumn air seemed to carry a faint hum of satisfaction. I had done what I needed to do, not out of petty revenge, but out of a deep-seated need for justice and honesty. The chapter was about to close, but not before the truth had its moment in the sun, however painful it might be for those caught in its glare. My mission was complete, or so I thought. The universe, it seemed, had one last, exquisite twist planned for me. The last message I sent was directly to Mark. It was a single line, sent as an email, stark and unforgiving. "You're dead to me." I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to wonder what I knew, what I was going to do. I knew he was already deployed, thousands of miles away, unable to intervene or explain himself immediately. This was the perfect timing, a quiet strike from afar. I wanted the fear of the unknown to gnaw at him, to make him squirm, knowing that his house of cards was about to collapse, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. This was back before email security got stricter, before two-factor authentication was common. I still had access to his account because he had used my laptop multiple times during our rekindled relationship, and his email password had saved automatically. It was an oversight on his part, a careless mistake, but for me, it was a golden key. I wasn't just sending a message. I was preparing to be a silent observer, a witness to the unraveling I had set in motion. Over the next day or so, my nerves were stretched thin, humming with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. I kept logging into his email, compulsively refreshing the inbox. At first, there was nothing. Then, a notification. An email from an address I didn't recognize, an email addressed to Mark. It was his wife. My heart leaped into my throat. The subject line was chillingly simple. What is this? I clicked on it, my finger trembling. The email was a furious, scathing tirade, a torrent of disbelief and hurt. She tore into him, her words raw with pain and anger. She mentioned the phone records, the highlighted calls, the dates and times. And then she wrote something that made me gasp aloud, a detail that provided a perverse, perfect closure. You left our honeymoon to get ice and called her. My breath hitched. He had called me while on his honeymoon. The audacity, the sheer contempt he must have had for both of us to make that call. That small, seemingly insignificant detail was the final piece of evidence that completely annihilated any lingering shred of doubt or misplaced affection I might have had for him. It was a sickening, undeniable confirmation of his calculated cruelty. Not long after, another email appeared in his inbox, this one from his mother, Martha. The subject line was just as damning. "Mark, what have you done?" This email was equally furious, though laced with a different kind of anger. She wasn't expressing heartbreak for his wife. She was ripping him a new one because she now had to deal with his mess under her own roof. She complained that his wife was crying, beside herself, hysterical with grief and anger that he had cheated. She detailed the scene unfolding in her own home, the wife's tears, the accusations, the unbearable tension. Martha was furious that her quiet life had been disrupted, furious that her son's lies had now become her problem, forcing her to confront a reality she had so eagerly dismissed and defended. The poetic justice of it all was almost too much to bear. She had sent me that venomous letter, calling me a whore, blaming me for causing problems. Now the problem was undeniably his, and it was playing outright in her living room, a drama she couldn't escape. She had to deal with the crying wife, the emotional fallout, the broken trust, all under the roof she shared. It was a masterpiece of karmic retribution. Since he had already deployed, there was nothing Mark could do but sit with it. He was trapped, thousands of miles away, unable to soothe his distraught wife or placate his enraged mother. I watched, fascinated and detached, as he tried to scramble and explain himself in email after email. He wrote to his wife, pleading, denying, minimizing, trying to concoct believable excuses. He wrote to his mother, trying to shift blame, begging her to calm his wife, to mediate. It was a pathetic, desperate dance. The emails continued for weeks, then months. I would log in occasionally just to check, and each time there would be a fresh volley of distressed messages from him, trying to make it better, trying to untangle the web he had woven. But the damage was done. The truth was out, irrefutable and undeniable. He was stuck, stewing in the consequences of his actions, unable to control the narrative, unable to escape the fallout. It was glorious. Absolutely, exquisitely glorious. A chef's kiss. In the end, I don't know if they got divorced. I never sought out that information directly, never felt the need to confirm it. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they did. The last email I saw from his wife was still filled with a profound sense of betrayal and a deep-seated lack of trust, and the last from his mother was still seething with resentment over the disruption he had caused her. My revenge wasn't about seeing him suffer in a specific way. It was about truth, about justice, about exposing the lies. And that I had done. The experience changed me profoundly. I learned a hard, brutal lesson about trust, about the dark corners of human deception. But I also learned about my own strength, my own capacity for resolve, for standing up for myself when wronged. I wasn't the naive, trusting girl who had spent months believing a beautiful lie. I was stronger, more discerning, more cautious, but also more confident in my ability to navigate the complexities of life. I returned to my job at the bookstore, my heart lighter, the weight of his betrayal finally lifted. The silence where his calls used to be was now just a peaceful quiet, no longer filled with lingering hope or pain. My friends, especially Sarah, were incredibly supportive, proud of my strength and resilience. They reminded me that I was worthy of genuine love and honesty, and that this experience, while painful, had revealed my true character. I continued to live my life in Norwich, surrounded by my books, my sketches, and my true friends, but with a new awareness, a quiet confidence that came from knowing I had faced down a great betrayal and emerged intact, even stronger. Years passed, and the whole Mark saga faded into a distant, almost unreal memory, a story I rarely told, a scar that had long since healed. I had moved on, focusing on my career, on building a life filled with genuine connections and authentic experiences. I even started dating someone wonderful, a kind and honest man who made me believe in love again, in a way that was grounded and real, not in the fairy tales I used to read. One crisp autumn afternoon, a few years after everything had happened, I was at a local farmer's market in Norwich, browsing through artisanal cheeses, enjoying the vibrant atmosphere. Suddenly I heard a voice, sharp and distinct, carrying over the chatter of the crowd. "Mark, you need to handle this." I froze. The voice was unmistakable. Martha, Mark's mother. My heart gave a surprised lurch, a ghost of the old fear and anger. I quickly ducked behind a stall filled with fresh produce, peering through a gap in the crates. And there he was, Mark. He looked older, his face etched with more lines than I remembered, a weariness in his eyes. He wasn't in uniform. He was standing next to his mother, who was looking absolutely furious, gesturing wildly at a scruffy-looking car parked illegally on the street, its bumper hanging loose. "This is your responsibility. The police said it's your fault, and I am not paying another dime for your mistakes," Martha ranted, her voice shrill with indignation. Mark just stood there, shoulders slumped, looking defeated. He mumbled something about the army cutting him loose and struggling to find work. It wasn't clear what had happened with his military career, but his demeanor suggested it hadn't ended well. He looked a shadow of the confident, charming man I once knew. Then another voice joined the conversation, a younger, weary voice I didn't recognize. "And what about our son, Mark? He needs new shoes for school next week. Your mother already said she won't help." A woman emerged from behind the car, holding the hand of a small boy, no older than 4 or 5. She wasn't the new wife from the car window. This woman looked tired, her clothes rumpled, her expression one of utter exasperation. The boy looked up at Mark with wide, innocent eyes. "Daddy, my shoe has a hole." Mark sighed, rubbing his temples, looking utterly overwhelmed. It was clear his life had not been the fairy tale he had tried to build on lies. This wasn't the wife I had written to. It seemed his previous marriage, the one I had exposed, hadn't lasted, and he had perhaps remarried, only to find himself in similar financial and personal struggles. His mother was still controlling, still blaming him, and he was still a mess. I watched for a few more moments, a strange sense of quiet satisfaction, and then turned away, melting back into the crowd. I walked away from the market, the incident a brief, unexpected epilogue to a story I thought was finished. I hadn't wanted him to suffer, not truly, but seeing the tangible consequences of his lifelong pattern of deceit playing out so publicly, so miserably, so many years later, was a profound vindication. He wasn't just deployed. He was stuck permanently in the messy reality of his own making, still reliant on his mother, still failing to take responsibility, still creating chaos for those around him. The true poetic consequence wasn't a single explosion, but a slow, continuous unraveling, a life forever haunted by the echoes of his past deceptions. My own life, by contrast, felt remarkably free, bathed in the clear, honest light of truth.